So part of the difference that we see between Aristotle and Plato is Aristotle is focused on the five senses, what we can see, what we can touch, what we can measure, what's around us and in front of us, whereas Plato is focused on the unseen, what we can't see. And it's interesting, a lot of philosophers don't focus so much on the seen, they focus on the unseen. And that's quite fascinating. And we could ask, what are the challenges faced if we just focus on the senses? What's outside the senses? For instance, if you just focus on your senses, you're not really going to be able to look at history in the past. That is Jesus' death on the cross. That's a historical event. And so we go to history. A lot of what we read in the Bible is historical. And then as well as that, there's experience. And you can have an inner experience when you pray. You can have a sense God speaking to you. And certainly John Wesley said that John Wesley used to teach logic at Oxford. And we often forget that. But he then had an experience when he went to North America, tried to preach to the Indians. He then, a lady felt she was in love with John Wesley, and he then ran away from her father because he might have been going to make him marry or something, ran into the wilderness of North America, got lost. We almost lost John Wesley, then made his way to a boat, caught his way back, hit a great storm. And then it was the faith of the Moravians that said, I need to have an experience of God. And when he landed back in London, he went to Aldersgate Church and he had an experience of God. And the Anglicans at that time believed that the three great ways of knowing were through tradition, through the Bible, and through the creeds, and also through logic or reason. And Wesley said the one thing that really strikes him about our Christian faith is an experience, but you can't see it. And so it's the unseen that is often the important thing in life and in the world. And we call that the Wesleyan quadrilateral tradition, Bible, logic, reason, and experience. So that's called the quadrilateral of Wesley. And I've written on that, and it's about the ways we know from a Christian perspective. The future you can't see, and we were talking about that with the student Johnny. We don't know what the future is. There's so much that we can't see. Tests measure the present in a limited sense. And then there's the intuitive sense, the subconscious sense. And so there's lots of other ways that we know there as well. So perception is important and seeing, but perception can get things wrong. How many circles can you see?
8.
Possibly. Anyone want to challenge this view of 8 circles? Karen?
If we're going by complete circles, I'd say about 4. If we're going by the number of circles that could be made, 6.
Yeah, or 8.
Or 10.
And then someone got a different view again. Martha?
I can see 4.
Yeah, 4.
In the middle, because they're complete ones, I guess.
Yeah. And yet someone else could say that there are no circles. That is, the idea of a circle is an optical illusion that's created in our mind that's quite Platonic. That is, actual drawn circles from an Aristotelian point of view could be 0. Or as someone has said, it could be 4. So there, is relativism the answer here? I guess if you want to investigate this, you would have to ask, who's the artist? What are they seeking to communicate? Is it the idea of 4 circles that are implied in our brain and another 4 that are suggested, but they're only half there, which is why you could get the 6 if you put those together. Yeah, there's all sorts going on there, isn't there? Here's another one. What is this? And it's a similar exercise. Any thoughts? If it's one of the letters of the alphabet, it could be the letter E, but it's largely missing, isn't it, rather than there. Also, you could go back to the previous one, which is which man is tallest? And I think they're all the same, but it's an optical illusion that's playing with our minds. I'm not convinced that optical illusions totally show us that perception doesn't work. I think the bigger problem is things like history, design, the invisible realities rather than the optical illusion problem. This one here, the dot could be closest to you or furthest away from you, but it's hard to see both. So the mind tends to want to do two things, but I don't know whether you could show this to people in Africa who lived in round houses. It tends to speak to us. This line here, which one that matches? It's the middle one, B, but if you have people around you who are calling out the answer A, then people tend to agree because we're swayed by the opinion of others. So there's some examples on optical illusions that we could go further with. Aristotle would say they tell us specific things that are going on, whereas Plato would say the real questions are the big general ideas. If you go to Project Gutenberg or there's some other sites, they'll allow you to read the writings of Plato and Aristotle. In Timaeus, Plato writes, imagine that the archetype who created the world, to imagine that an archetype was just created out of nothing would be blasphemy, because the world is the noblest of all creations and God is the best of causes. The world thus being created is created according to an eternal pattern, and we're all copies of something. And so there's an unchanging, intelligible nature behind all things. So I think this is rather similar to Christian faith, but it could be different. And then Socrates replies, excellent, Timaeus, I like your manner of approaching the subject. You may proceed. So that's Plato we looked at in the previous circle and the previous lesson. Now we're going on to look a bit at Aristotle. And Aristotle is focusing on, and Aristotle writes, the true proposition is in no way the cause of being a man. So we talk about a person as a man. The fact of the man being doesn't make it true. He says that it's our observations that describe what is. But Plato, by way of contrast, would say, no, there's the idea of a man out there, such as in the eternal realm, perhaps in the realm of the gods, and that a man reflects some eternal purpose. Whereas Aristotle would say the opposite. Some people say that deduction goes down from a generality to specifics, and it might do this by a hypothesis. So if we say that we have this idea of a man, we have a general idea of who a man is. He's got goals in life and plays cricket and footy, whatever our ideas of a man are, and then we look for proof of our hypothesis. We might have an idea that we could test intelligence, so that's the generality, and then Plato would say you then look around for that, because Plato is interested in the generalities. However, induction, I understand, is moving up from the details upwards. Induction says, let's look at the specifics, and then from the specifics try and work out. So we interview one person who says he's a man, we get some thoughts. He says, whatever being a man is, loving country and Western music or something like that makes a person a man. And then we begin to investigate that further. So that's the difference between Plato and Aristotle, I think, and both are important. I just want to take a digression now into grounded theory. In the grounded theory developed by Glasser and Strauss says that a lot of good educational insights come from the ground up. That is, you begin by looking at the evidence and then from the ground up. So rather than going into a class and saying there are bright students and not so bright students, grounded theory would say avoid all of your preconceptions and just look at the grounded evidence that you have and then build from there up. So grounded theory doesn't test a hypothesis that I have bright students and not so bright students. Rather, it describes what is in front of us with no prejudice at all. So there's no preconceived ideas. And it's a cyclical process. I look at my students, I describe as they are, I make no judgments, I work from the ground up. So Glasser explains to avoid reading, he says, ideally, if you're going to study Plato and Aristotle or whatever for your second assignment, don't read any resources, just look at what's happening in your classroom. I don't think it works, let me just admit. I've done a master's and a PhD, and I keep trying the grounded theory approach because I think it's really a nice idea, but in the end, I think you've got to read some books, don't you? And a lot of people admit that there. So a couple of thoughts. Let's go around a few students. Do you think grounded theory is a good approach in the classroom? Let's not label people. Let's not read too many books. Let's look at what's actually going on in the students' lives. Grounded theory. Could you write an assignment where you draw on grounded theory? Be very original. Yeah. Any thoughts there? Belinda, do you have any thoughts on this grounded theory approach?
I don't know. I think that it's a little bit dangerous, I think, because I think if you're not reading and you're coming up with ideas on your own, which is great, but how do you back those up?
Yeah, and I think a huge number of people say the danger of not reading is high. And they would say in true grounded theory, you should be reading lots and lots, but you should still be trying to be unbiased in what you're working on. So it could encourage more original thinking, but it could be very dangerous. Martha, thoughts?
Look, I think it's maybe a good place to start when you're looking at the classroom, in the sense that if you're looking at students and like their capabilities and things, you're not going in, there's no bias, you're not going in with preconceived ideas of who can who's, as you said in our last example, who's the smart one, who performs well in tests and who don't, according to their intelligence. But obviously it's not good to stay there. You need to be getting to know your students and reading how to best teach them. And and
students constantly surprise us. The one that we thought was not interested in music or art suddenly discovers an interest in it. And the one that we thought was going to go a huge distance with a sport or music or art suddenly has lost all interest in it. And so students constantly surprise us in that they avoid the labels we attempt to put on them. Sally, any thoughts on the benefits or problems of grounded theory?
Not really yet. I think I need a little bit more time to think about it.
Yeah, sounds good. Shelley Ann, any thoughts?
The first thing that came to mind was that I've seen relief teachers do this, or teachers coming into a classroom halfway through the year, where they'll listen to their neighbouring teachers about students and what it's like, that handover that you have, you know, at the end of the year or the start of a new academic year, and students, you know, the teachers are making observations about their emotional and social needs or issues. But as a teacher coming in, you don't want to, in some ways, have those already in your head. So you kind of nodding politely, but ignoring it to a certain extent, unless it's a substantial, you know, disability that you have to be all over. There's those behaviours that you go, well, this kid's always doing that. But I think I've seen it really work, because if you come in as a strong teacher and you know the rules of your classroom and you've set them in place, and then you see a behaviour, you can call it out based on nothing else except that one incident. And I've seen a teacher just kill like this kid's repetitive lying. Like all of a sudden he's been lying for 2 years and no one's been pulling him up on it. And this teacher just knew her craft. New South Wales teacher. and yeah, she just nailed it. She just said, well, based on what you've just said, you know, it looks like you're not telling the truth. Because she did it from what she was doing in the classroom, and she didn't have, it was her teaching, her style, her classroom.
Yeah. And I think so often we need a bit of both. We need to listen a little bit to what might be happening, but we also need to try things fresh and new. And as times go on, we need to listen and talk to others, but we also need to realise we have our own intuitive way of understanding and responding. So I think that's very good, Shelley-Ann. Great example. Two other things to consider. One is quantitative methods. So if you're going to collect information, you can give out quantitative responses, and then qualitative is where you might do interviews, and it's more open-ended, and you're gathering information along the way. So you can use qualitative methods as well. So in contrast to Plato, where we've got ideas and ideals, Aristotle is known for focusing on the details, and I think we often need both. Aristotle proceeds from observations to deduction of probable causes and realities. I think when you do that in the classroom, you need to build up expertise. And I think it's important that you become good at a certain year level. You also become good at the certain skills you have. Some are very good with music, others not so good with music. Some are very good with counselling, others it's not their gift. And so everyone has this different set of skills, and I would encourage you to really develop your skills, and maybe even after a bachelor's you go on and do a master's in a certain area that is along where your skills and interests are. And even as you do your bachelor degree, I would encourage you to think about where are your strengths, where are your skills, and to look for additional resources in those areas, because you get expertise in those areas, and part of this expertise can be from observing. So I think you do the Aristotle approach, but at the same time, I think you also need to have a bit of the Platonic idealism as well. Other people like Aristotle have been John Locke, George Berkeley, David Hume, a lot of other people. They argue that concepts are not inborn. We learn as we gradually develop from experience. We don't have these grand concepts within that Plato talks about. The other term that Aristotle uses is syllogism. And so this refers, similar to Plato, who said there were 3 steps, and the 3 steps for Plato were truth, belief, and then justification. And so what we have is justified true belief, when the truth that we think we have, the student is bright, the student's not so bright, the student's intelligent, not so intelligent. We believe it. We've either listened to others or we've observed it, and we've done grounded theory, and we've observed what's going on, or someone's told us and we've just listened to the rumor. And then we look, is there evidence? And then we go back and we adjust our view of the truth. And then we have a new belief system now. Johnny wasn't as low intelligence as we thought. And then we look for more evidence. And so it's a circle that goes around from A to B to C. That's Plato's model. And then in Aristotle's model, we have a major premise: all humans are mortal. A minor premise: Greeks are humans. And the conclusion: all Greeks are mortal. Now, our major premise might be bright students get high grades. So that's a general proposition. Bright students get high grades, that is intelligent. Bright students should get high grades. And then the minor premise is that Johnny is a bright, intelligent student. And then the conclusion is Johnny will gain high grades. Who can tell me what are some of the things that are wrong with this three-step process there? Shelley-Ann, you had some insights before. What's wrong with this idea of saying the bright students will get high grades? Johnny's a bright student. This is my belief. And therefore Johnny will get high grades. What's wrong with that?
There's the evidence steps missing.
Yeah,
the observation.
So I think certainly one thing as teachers we need to do a lot of is observation. And I would encourage you to keep lots of records. So whenever the students misbehave and don't bring their homework in, put the date down, put down the time, put down what happens. And then when the parent comes along and says, my students completed it all, you can say, on the 21st, this didn't happen. On the 26th, this didn't happen. And then you've got the evidence. So I think you want lots of evidence. Sally, thoughts on what else is missing from this so-called logical series of steps?
You don't know what's going on elsewhere. Like
Exactly.
just because Johnny has the ability to get high grades doesn't mean he's going to get it every time.
Yeah. And so the major premise is not always true, is it? The bright students could in fact have ASD, they could have other things going on. So I think there's a problem with that major premise there. And then, as you say, there's all sorts of things that could be going on. So I think that's a very, very good observation. Martha, any thoughts on this three-step process?
Intelligent. Define intelligent. That's my my thoughts. I don't know. It's probably just a vicious cycle. But that's my problem with it.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly if you've got people from a different cultural background, they'll have a different approach to what is intelligence. And you could look at Indigenous people, and there could be all sorts of problems there. So there's a lot of problems with this model, but that's a model that is still largely followed in thinking that you got a major premise, and then you've got a minor premise, and then a conclusion. And all of us have got to make those sorts of decisions. The major premise might be banks and interest. The minor premise might be a bank, and I place it there, and then another one could be that I get interest on it. But there's all sorts of problems with that three-step process, isn't it? And we could look at lots of other examples of that. So again, Plato and Aristotle is the major theme this week. Plato saying that the big universals are important, and Aristotle saying the universals really are artificial mental constructs. And these are two different ways of looking at the world that you'll find amongst some of your brightest students, and also amongst some of the parents out there. So both have a concept that God is involved. Aristotle tends to be a bit more focused on the material there. You can read Aristotle's writings in which he has these resources there. And before the earlier this morning, I was reading a bit of Aristotle, as people do, this sort of thing that you do to pass the time, read some Aristotle. Part one of his book on posterior analytics teaching. All instruction given or received by way of argument proceeds from pre-existing knowledge. So this is good teaching material here in that sense, isn't it? And so you need to take into account the pre-existing knowledge. Notice that Aristotle uses the word argument not for argument like in a wild attack one on another, but for a careful thought through presentation. And that's exactly the opposite of what some people mean by argument, a well thought out presentation. So you can read these teachings there about defining knowledge, what is true knowledge, scientia knowledge. Fascinates me that they're talking about science here 400 BC, which is 2,400 years ago, but it does include character formation and other aspects of development. And it was only from 1500 through to 1900 that science gets restricted more to the narrower understandings of science that we have to this very day. So Aristotle focuses on the senses and the information that they yield to us. And so we encourage you in teaching to use your senses, observe what the students are doing, have lots of ways of measuring what's going on as much as you can. Aristotle spoke of four causes. That is, if you're doing education, there's a formal cause. That is, you're shaping it, you're developing it. And then there's the material. So in education, you might be developing your curriculum, your classroom presentation. And then there's an efficient cause. You're seeking to bring about change. So your education involves change in the students. And then there's an end purpose on education. Anyone want to tell me what's the end purpose of education? So students come into your class. What's the end purpose of your class? Gabriella, any thoughts on what the end purpose of your classes are?
I guess to have your students leave with the ability and knowledge to continue learning. I don't know. I
like that. So there's a certain scaffolding going on, and certainly you see that every year in mathematics, that they're adding the next level to their mathematical understanding. And then my wife said to me the other day, she feels she doesn't need geometry and all of these complex things. I beg to differ, having been a maths teacher, but she was a primary school teacher, and but she is using Excel spreadsheets and she is engaging with budgets and all of those things as well. So I think she is doing lots of this. Yeah. Belinda, what's the end point? If we've got 4 steps in, we're shaping our curriculum, we've got the material that we're using, we're seeking to bring changes. What's the end purpose and goal that we're setting out to do in education?
For me, probably the confidence for the students to use that knowledge and find a purpose for themselves.
Yeah, I like that. So it's they're not just gaining the knowledge, that they're going to have a confidence with it and in using it there as well. Yeah, that's great. Sally, thoughts on what the end goal of the teaching education is?
I think one of the end goals of teaching or someone going through education would be to be able to think for themselves, to be a part of the community around them.
Yeah, and which connects with Belinda's thought on confidence, but it could also include skills in thinking for yourself, and it could include relational skills in being a part of the community, and often that can get left out. It could include ethical skills. One of the things that certainly Aristotle says is that happiness, virtue, and the good are very important parts of what we do. And also he says in teaching and communicating, then character is very, very important in what we do. Aristotle certainly taught about the importance of developing an argument. So you'd stop the student and the student would say, so-and-so is poking me. And then you would say, can you explain more fully? You know, that this student is annoying me because, and that's annoying me because I'm wanting to focus on my work. So you develop a capacity to formulate the argument. But Aristotle also said that you have character as very important. That is, you believe and listen to people with character. And that's part of the argument that's presented. And I think that's been lost in our present world over the last 200 years or so. That is, you could present an essay on the history of Australia, but how do we grade the character of the person who presents the essay? Because Aristotle would say that's part of the presentation. And in some universities, when you do a master's or a PhD, they get you to stand up and speak and address a dozen of the faculty. And then Aristotle would say you'd have to grade their character as well. That is, do they come across as an authentic, trustworthy person? I was going to say, rather than a used car salesman, but I knew that would get me in trouble because some of my students' husbands are possibly used car salesmen. So I'll take that back. But you know what I mean? There is, different character presentations that people give. And Aristotle is saying that should be measured as part of the presentation. And I think that's an important part of teaching and education, isn't it? Is to stop the class sometime and say, let's talk about what is meant by character, and what is meant by caring for one another, and why do we value that? So Aristotle talked about the ethos or character, including trust, integrity, reputation, based on the past and what a person is known for from the past, credibility, again, what knowledge have they built up, how have they communicated that? And for all of these values that Plato and Aristotle and Socrates described, they're also vices that they encourage their students to avoid. So pride, you'd lose marks for that. Envy, lose marks. Gluttony, so I don't know whether you put a measuring tape around their waist and measure that. Lust, anger, greed, slothfulness. But I was just thinking, teacher, I had my eyes closed so I could concentrate. So I think that these virtues are important. We talk about the cardinal virtues of the Greek philosophers: fortitude and courage, not giving up, justice, fair and equitable, prudence, moderation, temperance, abstinence. And then we talk about the spiritual virtues, such as the Apostle Paul and Jesus used: faith, hope, and love, and care for one another. So these are listed in a number of ways, but they were seen by Aristotle as part of the ways we understand truth. So truth is not just information, truth is character and integrity. Another way we understand truth is by the passion that the person uses to communicate truth. So if you communicate with passion, then you're committed to it. It's not the only way. You need more than passion, but it's important. And then there is the logic of the argument. There's the evidence that's presented, which Aristotle focuses upon. And then there is the reasoning structure of the argument, which Aristotle wrote a great deal about. So drawing it all together, today we've looked at Socrates and questioning, we've looked at Plato and ideals, and we have looked at Aristotle and the details. You've had a forum exercise where you've thought about the cave, and what people think is real may in fact not be everything that you need to consider. And Plato says it's the unseen ideals. And Martha's challenged me to think about how do we put it into manageable pieces. And I think we can bring it down to, there are fairly simple, smaller number of choices, and we can work through those. It shouldn't be overwhelming, but it could take time. And we should allow people to take even years to work through the options and not rush these decision makings. We could think about some other scales of development, and we haven't got time to go into these a lot today. And you've got Erickson's theories of development. You've also got James Fowler and his theories. We probably haven't got time to go into those too much. So James Fowler talks about stages of faith. So we said that you can believe things, but you've got to have faith in what's going on. Andrew Newberg says that belief governs nearly every aspect of our lives. What and who do we believe? Who do we trust? What and who do we avoid? What do we see as value? What do we get a sense of? And so faith is important, and James Fowler's one of many who've written on that, and Erickson and others. So in summary, we've started to look at some ways of knowing truth today. Sense perception, we'll look at that further. Reasoning, two major approaches to reasoning. One is the detailed examination of Aristotle, and then there are the unseen ideals of Plato. I find that fascinating but challenging. And a lot of my Christian faith is unseen ideals, and it's got to be taken on faith alone. Whereas I live in a world that's very Aristotle-like, and it's measuring everything that's going on in the immediate. But all the things that really matter tend to be the Platonic ideal things that go beyond love and music and poetry and heaven. All the things that really matter are more than just the immediate material things and the results in the test. It's not the results in the test that matter so much as what's really happening with the knowledge that's there, etc. So let's take a few moments now to go round and hear what stood out today. We've got language that's used as well. In weeks to come, we'll talk about emotion. That can be part of the way we communicate, and then propaganda can be part of the way we communicate as well, and then faith can be as well. But can I get Gabriella first, or let's start with Karen first. So Karen, what stood out today?
Probably I can't remember what it was called, but it was the grounded.
Grounded theory.
That was it.
Yep.
Just because it's just another interesting approach to education that I hadn't actually really had a look at before, and I just found it really interesting to not only look at the subject, but spend some time and look at learning itself as the concept, and how your pupils learn, and so you can get a gauge for each class that you have on what sort of teaching style you need to adapt to the most, or if there's something that's going to be more useful that you wouldn't normally use, but it would be beneficial for the students. You can sort of learn that through grounded theory in just having those open-ended discussions with your students, maybe for like a single lesson or a double lesson, where while not all questions may get answered and not all students may be completely heard as much as the rest of them, just because of the way that the students are in their introversion, extroversion, wanting to have their voice heard. It's just, yeah, I think it's really useful tool that may go underutilized.
Yeah, so two great points there, the grounded theory and then Socratic questioning, that is using the questioning, but having various safety mechanisms for when it gets out of the fireplace and starts to spread around the classroom. Yeah. Martha, your thoughts on what stood out today?
Yeah, so I actually really like the Socratic questioning as well, and that idea and how that would play out in the classroom. I particularly liked it because I think I like the idea of hearing from every student, and I like, hearing a response from those kids that don't offer up one, that don't put their hand up. So, but still making a way that can still get their ideas. So including them. And I just also like just this whole idea of the idealist versus the pragmatic approach to teaching and learning. And yeah.
And certainly one way that every student can get to speak is the pair share approach, isn't it? So you ask a question of the student next to you, etc. Whereas if you do it entirely the whole class, then that may take longer. Gabriella, your thoughts?
I was just finding it interesting how these ancient philosophers and thinkers inform so much of our day-to-day teaching styles, like that whole Socratic method. Just, I don't know, I find that so fascinating how that's endured for so long and it's still, I don't know, I think it's cool.
Yeah, and that speaks to me. If you write something influential, it could endure for a long time. And if you wrote it down, it could endure. Ancient history is fascinating because these guys were very interesting people. It's amazing. Yeah, sounds great. Alex, what stood out?
I really enjoyed learning about the different theories of truth. That was new for me. So the correspondence theory, in that, the truth is what is truth. The coherence theory, and that is that it will cohere in one area. Is it? And then pragmatism theory as well, in terms of considering different students have different levels of intelligence. That was new for me.
Yeah. And often we have to fall back on the pragmatic theory or the pragmatic approach, in that we wrestle with other concepts of truth, and that we've got to be a little bit humble about what we know so little, but this will keep us going, but we'll keep trying to gather more information. Shelley-Ann, thoughts?
The last point, I enjoyed the irony, and I'm just jumping in, if you can correct me, Aristotle being big on ethics is ironic because they're from Mosaic law, like they come from God intervening in our sin. I don't know if I'm on the right path there. And I'm finding it like I'm feeling that tension of just simply realism and idealism, but I'm feeling it right now because like a school motto of the school where I am is to prepare students for life. But like for instance, the Oxford Maths book that they are doing has one answer. That's right. One answer. Yes. And what if they think about it in a different way?
Yes.
It's wrong. So yes. I find that just really, that's an actual, just almost a palpable tension of we want to look at the whole child and the whole person, and we want to value arts, and the government doesn't, the Australian curriculum doesn't, and you really just need to be able to get a job.
Yes. So true. We speak of general revelation and specific revelation.
Yep.
So general revelation would mean that God reveals truth to people in the Solomon Islands, people in Asia, etc. And so Plato and Aristotle can write down something in terms of truth. Specific revelation is that God reveals specific things to Moses. And so we can say that Moses, there's a general revelation about that you don't murder people, because I think people have a conscience, but there's a specific revelation in terms of the Sabbath. However, there's a general revelation we need to rest perhaps once a week. So there's that sort of thing going on there a little bit with the Greeks, and Plato certainly in Timaeus is writing about God. Aristotle is writing about God. So there's general revelation and specific revelation. And I really like what you say about the idea of one answer. That really doesn't fit with the Socratic questioning and the whole person and the whole child. And one of the things we may want to think about at some stage is a philosophy of education. And when you apply for a job or move to another school, they may ask you, what's your philosophy of education? And I think if you're authentic and real and you speak about, I believe in the whole person, etc., then that reflects who you are, and it reflects how you really, really teach. But at the same time, you're under pressure to get these specific results and etc. So, I can see that tension. Belinda, your thoughts?
There's a few things that stood out for me. I think the breakdown of Plato's third step, like the truth is there, the know it and believe it, and then with the justification and evidence, just the breakdown of that, just making you really deep think about that. The questioning everything. I love the thought of being in a classroom and being able to, for the students' personalities to shine in their questions and creativity and their deep thinking. I mean, to open up like a floor, of course, yes, you have to keep it constrained somewhat, like can't go off in a crazy tangent.
Yes.
But just some of the questions and answers that will come from that. Just I've just been in classrooms already, and some of the kids, the things that they say to you, like, wow, that is really, really great thinking. And I mean, and I still learn things off them. So, it's probably that. And I also loved the part about where when you read something, just to be able to see the writer's character in it. I think that's profound, because you can, when you do read things, you can see, if they're authentic and they're passionate about it, and that shines through, and that makes you passionate and you want to read it. So that's about it.
Yeah, and that does sum up a good point that Aristotle is making, is that when you read, you should consider the character of the author. And so often these days, you can even look up a YouTube clip of the author and you can listen to them speaking on a YouTube channel. And so I encourage you, when you spot a textbook or you spot a journal article, try that. Find out a bit more about the author. You can also find out a bit about their background, and that can be useful as well. That can encourage you that people who came from such and such a background, this worked in their life, these were the challenges they faced. And so, as Aristotle says, character is important in our communication. Authenticity is important in our communication. So there's so many things we can learn from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. We've touched on the tip of the iceberg, but as I think Gabriella said, even though they were 2,000, 300 or 400 years ago, they're still influencing us today. And it's amazing how many people you and I can influence. Every year, if you're speaking to 25 or 30 students, that adds up over 2 or 3 years, and the many years that you're teaching, you're communicating something into their lives. And so that's very, very important. Let me just pray as we conclude. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the opportunity to consider these Greek philosophers who've been teachers themselves, and we pray that you'd continue to develop us as teachers, that we might be more effective in passing on truth to others. Lord, help us to develop our skills in understanding what is truly true, what is building real character and real change in lives, and avoiding those snares that can take us away from truth and lead us to false ways of teaching and not developing, we pray. Amen. So thank you, each one. I've enjoyed reading through your forum posts. They've been great. Anyone want to raise a hand because they have anything they want to discuss? So Shelley Ann, I'll keep discussing there with Shelley Ann now. And then the other, can I just remind you of your second assignment that is due at some stage, and in that minor essay, you're thinking about truth, but you're thinking about your particular approach to truth. So truth sometimes can be a struggle, but we're wanting you to reflect on your own personal worldview, and it may take a few weeks for you to work through your view of truth, your view of the classroom, your view of the students. And then we want you to find scholarly resources that discuss these viewpoints about the background that you come from and how all of that applies. So thank you, each one. So I'll stop the recording there.